today, right, and you walk near Smithfield Market, you are actually standing on the exact spot where a man named William Wallace was butchered.
Mm-hmm.
It
And
was
so,
way back in the year 1305.
yeah, that's right.
And, I mean, we all know the legend, of course, the blockbuster movie, the sweeping Highland landscapes, all that blue face paint.
Oh, definitely. And those booming speeches about freedom.
Exactly. But what the movies never really tell you is that the English king who ordered that gruesome execution, he didn't view Wallace as this grand romantic hero,
Not at all.
right? Or even like a worthy aristocratic rival.
Yeah.
He basically viewed him as a bureaucratic inconvenience.
Just a total nuisance.
Yeah, a jumped up middle class outlaw who was interrupting the smooth administrative machinery of the English Empire.
It's a phenomenal disconnect between the historical reality and the cultural myth that we all grew up with.
It really is.
Because when you examine the actual documents from the late 13th century, the cinematic gloss just melts away instantly. And you're left with a landscape that is brutal, cynical, and just driven by intense legal and political maneuvering.
And that is exactly our mission for you today in this deep dive. We are taking a hammer to that historical camera lens you might be used to.
Well said.
We want to strip away centuries of accumulated legend to reveal a story that is actually, I mean, infinitely more fascinating than any screenplay.
Absolutely.
But to do that, we're relying on a very specific and honestly somewhat frustrating stack of sources.
Oh, frustrating is the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're dealing with a patchwork of surviving English chronicles, which are inherently biased,
Because they were written by the enemy.
Exactly. They were written by hostile witnesses, mostly clerics and administrators who actively despised the Scottish Rebellion.
Right. They aren't exactly going to paint Wallace in a good light.
No, of course not. And then on the other side, we have these really sparse Scottish administrative and legal records.
Just receipts and legal notes, basically.
Pretty much. And many of those were lost or deliberately destroyed over the centuries.
It was a very fragmented picture. And then looming over everything, we have this massive thing called the Wallace.
Oh, the Wallace. Yeah. Written by a poet known as Blind Harry.
Right.
And this was written in the late 15th century.
Which is, what, almost 200 years after Wallace actually died?
Precisely. It is a sprawling, violently anti-English epic poem.
Right.
I mean, it is essentially patriotic propaganda, and it single-handedly established the modern Wallace myth that you see in pop culture today.
It's wild that one poem did all that.
It really is. So trying to separate the historical man from Blind Harry's towering, fictionalized demigod is like the central challenge of studying this period.
Okay, let's unpack this because I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now.
Right.
Why should you care about a 13th century outlaw today?
Right. What's the relevance?
Exactly. Why dedicate a whole deep dive to this?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is that this story is a masterclass in how history is recorded, rewritten, and just completely weaponized for political gain.
It really is the ultimate case study.
Yeah, it's a case study of how an obscure minor landowner somehow managed to bring the most powerful, heavily armored monarch in the British Isles to an absolute standstill. But to understand the sheer scale of that achievement, we have to rewind. We have to look at the catastrophic power vacuum that made William Wallace possible in the first place.
We do. And to set that stage, you have to completely discard the idea that medieval Scotland was always a fractured, chaotic war zone.
Right, because that's the stereotype.
Exactly. But for the vast majority of the 13th century, it was quite the opposite. Under King Alexander III, who ruled for 37 years, Scotland enjoyed a period of remarkable stability and prosperity.
It was a golden age, relatively speaking.
Oh, by medieval standards, absolutely a golden age. The borders were secure, trade was flourishing.
Wow.
And relations with England were actually incredibly cordial.
Really?
Yeah, the Scottish and English royal families were heavily intertwined by marriage. Alexander himself was married to the sister of the English king, Edward I.
Okay, so they're literally family.
They are. They attended each other's feasts, they held lands in each other's kingdoms. It was very integrated.
But the architecture of medieval politics is terrifyingly fragile, isn't it?
Extremely.
Because all of that peace, all of that economic stability is entirely dependent on the physical heartbeat of one human being.
One person, yeah.
And on a terrible stormy night in March 1286, that heartbeat stops.
It's a tragic story.
King Alexander is riding his horse along the cliffs in Fife, trying to reach his new wife in the pitch black.
Just a terrible idea in a storm.
Right. And the horse loses its footing. The king falls, breaks his neck, and dies.
And the geopolitical shockwave of that single fall, I mean, it cannot be overstated.
Because of the heir situation.
Exactly. Alexander's 3 children from his first marriage had all predeceased him, so he had no immediate male heir.
None at all.
None. The only direct descendant left was his granddaughter, and she was a tiny child living across the North Sea.
This is the Maid of Norway.
Yes, Margaret, the Maid of Norway. She was essentially a toddler who had never even seen Scotland.
Wow.
So the Scottish political elite, a group known as the Guardians of Scotland, they had to step in to govern in her name, just desperately trying to keep the kingdom from fracturing.
And they actually do a pretty good job at first, right? I mean, they even broker a treaty to marry this little girl to the son of Edward I of England.
They do, yeah.
Which, if you think about it, is a massive diplomatic triumph. It solves the succession crisis and potentially unites the 2 crowns peacefully over time without a single drop of blood being spilled.
It was a brilliant piece of statecraft. But, as we know, medieval mortality rates do not care about statecraft.
Right.
In 1290, the little Maid of Norway is finally put on a ship to claim her kingdom. She makes it as far as the Orkney Islands, falls severely ill, and dies.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
She was perhaps 7 years old.
And that is the exact moment the floor completely collapses out from under Scotland.
Utter collapse.
Because now, the direct royal bloodline is extinct. Suddenly, you don't just have 1 or 2 people claiming the throne.
No, you have 13.
13 different noblemen, known to history as the competitors, all stepping forward and waving various family trees around, claiming they have the legal right to be King of Scots.
It was chaos. But the field of 13 quickly narrowed down to 2 serious contenders, John Balliol and Robert Bruce.
Okay, Robert Bruce.
And just to clarify for the listeners, this is Robert Bruce, the competitor, the grandfather of the famous King Robert the Bruce we will discuss later on.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this dispute, because it wasn't just a popularity contest among the nobles. It was a massive legal headache.
A nightmare, really.
Yeah, you have Balliol arguing his claim based on primogeniture, meaning he descends from the eldest daughter of a previous royal prince.
Right.
But then Bruce is arguing based on proximity of blood. He descends from a younger daughter, but he is 1 generation closer to the original royal source.
It's exactly.
How do you resolve a constitutional crisis of that magnitude without starting a civil war?
That was exactly the terror gripping the Scottish nobility. A civil war between the Bruce and Balliol factions would have devastated the kingdom.
Right.
So the Guardians of Scotland make a decision that will just haunt their nation for generations. They invite King Edward I of England to arbitrate the dispute.
Wow.
They ask him to act as the neutral judge, look at the legal arguments, and declare the rightful king.
I have to stop you there, because looking at this through a modern lens, inviting Edward I to pick your king feels remarkably like inviting a wolf to mediate a property dispute between a flock of sheep.
It's a very fair assessment.
Edward wasn't exactly known as a gentle, hands-off neighbor, you know. Were the Scottish magnates just incredibly naive here, or were they truly that blinded by the fear of civil war?
Well, it's easy to call them naive with the benefit of hindsight, but remember the context we established earlier. Scotland and England had been peaceful neighbors for decades.
Okay, yeah.
Edward was the brother-in-law to their late King Alexander. And furthermore, Edward was widely respected across Europe as a lawmaker.
Right, the English Justinian, they called him.
Exactly. So they genuinely thought they were inviting a senior respected statesman to provide legal arbitration.
But they miscalculated Edward's ambition.
Completely. Edward did not view this as a favor between friendly neighbors. He saw it as the ultimate geopolitical opportunity.
Of course he did.
He traveled north to the border, but before he even looked at a single piece of evidence regarding the succession, he dropped a legal bombshell.
What did he do?
He demanded that all the Scottish nobles and all 13 competitors formally recognize him as the Lord Paramount of Scotland.
He essentially tells them, I will pick your next king, but whoever I pick works for me.
Yes, and he enforced that on a daily structural basis. This wasn't just some vague ceremonial overlordship like English kings had sometimes claimed in centuries past.
Right, a symbolic thing.
No, Edward was demanding absolute, practical, feudal subjugation. He wanted to be the supreme authority. He claimed the right to hear appeals from Scottish courts, demand Scottish taxes, and conscript Scottish men into his armies.
So the Scottish nobles are completely backed into a corner here.
Entirely.
If they say no, Edward's massive army is sitting right there on the border. And they still have a civil war brewing at home anyway.
So they really had no choice.
So they swallow their pride, they agree to his terms. In 1292, Edward reviews the laws and chooses John Balliol to be the King of Scots.
Which, legally speaking, was probably the correct choice based on primogeniture.
Right. But Balliol's reign is a nightmare from day one.
Oh, an absolute disaster. Because Edward treated him with a level of disrespect that was almost pathological.
Yeah.
Balliol wasn't treated as a monarch. He was treated like a middle manager in the English corporate structure.
Give us an example of how that practically worked, because I think for you listening, people imagine kings just sitting in castles wearing crowns, totally immune from daily humiliation.
Right, let's look at the legal system. In a feudal society, the king is the ultimate fount of justice. If you have a dispute in Scotland, the King of Scots is the final word.
Makes sense.
But Edward actively encouraged Scottish subjects who were unhappy with Balliol's rulings to appeal directly to him in London.
Oh, wow. Bypassing their own king.
Bypassing him entirely. Edward would then issue summons demanding King John Balliol travel all the way to English courts to answer these petty grievances.
That's insane.
He forced him to stand at the bar like a common defendant. It completely neutered Balliol's authority in front of his own people.
It's a calculated psychological dismantling of a rival crown.
Very calculated.
And it escalates.
Yeah.
Right. Edward demands that Scotland provide troops and funds for his war against France.
Yes.
And finally, by 1295, the Scottish nobility reaches a breaking point. They realize Balliol is completely compromised, so they effectively sideline him.
They have to.
A council of 12 magnates takes over the daily running of the government, and they do the one thing guaranteed to infuriate Edward.
Oh, the ultimate provocation.
They sign a mutual defense treaty with France.
The famous Old Alliance.
Yes.
From Edward's perspective, this is high treason. His vassals have allied with his greatest enemy. His response is immediate, ferocious, and totally merciless.
Right.
In the spring of 1296, Edward invades Scotland.
And this is where the sheer, unvarnished brutality of medieval warfare really comes into focus for us.
It really does.
Edward crosses the border and attacks Berwick upon Tweed. Now, today, if you visit Berwick, it is a quiet town. But back then, it was the economic powerhouse of Scotland.
It was.
It was a massive, wealthy trading port.
People called it the Alexandria of the North. And Edward's army didn't just capture it, they annihilated it.
Completely leveled it.
When the town initially refused to surrender, the English breached the rudimentary defenses. The ensuing massacre was horrific.
Just awful.
Contemporary chroniclers describe a slaughter so intense that the blood supposedly ran down the streets and powered the local mills.
Oh my God.
Thousands of citizens, men, women, and children were put to the sword.
It's literally state-sponsored terrorism, designed to break the psychological will of the entire nation in a single afternoon.
And it works.
It works perfectly. The Scottish army is subsequently crushed at the Battle of Dunbar. King John Balliol is captured, and the humiliation he faces is almost theatrical.
Edward forces Balliol to formally abdicate, but he doesn't just have him sign a piece of paper in a quiet room.
No.
He stages a public ceremony where Balliol is stripped of his royal vestments. They literally tear the royal coat of arms right off his tunic,
earning him the brutal nickname Tomb Tabard, which translates to the empty coat.
Yes.
A king who is nothing but a hollow piece of fabric.
And then Edward initiates a systematic erasure of Scottish identity. He marches across the country, confiscating the physical symbols of nationhood.
He takes the important stuff.
He steals the Stone of Destiny from Scone Abbey, the sacred stone upon which Scottish kings had been crowned for centuries. And he ships it down to Westminster Abbey in London. He is physically demonstrating to them that there will never be another Scottish coronation.
And to seal the deal, he introduces a document that fundamentally alters the daily reality of the Scottish elite, the ragman roll.
Ah!
Explain the mechanics of this, because it wasn't just a symbolic gesture, was it?
Not at all. The ragman roll was a massive instrument of legal subjugation. Edward demanded that every landowner, every noble, every cleric, and every civic leader in Scotland affix their personal wax seal to this immense parchment.
Everyone had to sign it.
Everyone of consequence. By doing so, they were swearing absolute personal fealty to Edward as their direct lord.
Okay.
Over 2,000 names were recorded. If your name was on that roll, you were legally bound to England.
Right.
If you rebelled after signing it, you weren't just an enemy combatant, you were a traitor under the law, subject to the most horrific executions.
So by the summer of 1296, the Kingdom of Scotland has basically ceased to exist.
Effectively, yes.
Its king is in an English prison. Its armies are shattered. Its nobles have legally signed away their sovereignty out of fear for their lives and their property.
We're terrified.
English sheriffs and tax collectors are installed in every major town and castle. It is an occupied, humiliated country, seething with a deep, silent resentment. And it's into this massive, terrifying power vacuum that a completely unknown man steps onto the historical stage.
Which brings us to the emergence of William Wallace.
Finally.
And it's crucial to establish just how obscure his origins really were, especially in a society utterly obsessed with rank and bloodlines.
Right, he wasn't a noble.
Wallace was not a magnate. He was not an earl. He was born sometime in the late 13th century, likely in the southwest of Scotland, areas like Ayrshire or Renfrewshire.
His father was a man named Alan Wallace, right? A minor landowner.
Yes, the Wallace family were minor gentry. They held some land, but they were not independent lords.
Right.
They were tenants, specifically vassals of the incredibly powerful Stuart family.
So if we're translating this social hierarchy into modern terms for the listeners, Wallace isn't a peasant working the dirt in the fields, but he's absolutely nowhere near the billionaires of his day.
Wait, not even close.
He's firmly in the murky middle class of the feudal system. He's a guy with a horse, maybe a sword, and enough free time to get an education, because the sources suggest he could actually read Latin.
Yes, he was educated.
But he has zero political influence.
Exactly the kind of man who would normally live and die without ever leaving a mark on the historical record.
Right.
But the English occupation changed the calculus of daily life. We have to look at the mechanics of what an occupation actually meant.
What did it look like on the ground?
It didn't just mean a different flag flying over the local castle. It meant new foreign sheriffs aggressively extracting taxes to fund English wars.
Taking their money.
It meant English soldiers garrisoned in your town, requisitioning your grain and your livestock, taking what they wanted.
It's the constant friction of daily oppression. And the chronicles agree that Wallace possessed one specific trait that made him uniquely suited to channel the resulting anger and imposing physical presence.
He was a big guy.
Yeah, accounting for later mythological exaggeration, he was clearly an unusually large, powerful, and charismatic man.
Which is vital. Because he lacked the noble title that traditionally commanded obedience, the men who chose to follow him had to be convinced by sheer force of personality and martial capability.
They had to believe in him personally.
Exactly. And that local friction finally ignites in May 1297. This is the moment William Wallace firmly and violently enters the documented record.
He and a band of men launch a night assault on the town of Lanark. And they target the symbol of English oppression in their region, the English-appointed sheriff, William de Heselrigge. And they hack him to pieces.
Brutal.
This wasn't a bar brawl that got out of hand. This was a calculated, violently executed political assassination.
It was a direct strike against the administrative apparatus of the occupation. But this is exactly where we run face first into the mythology of Blind Harry.
Wow.
Because if you know the pop culture narrative, there is a very specific, highly emotional reason given for why Wallace targets Heselrigge.
Right. In the legend and in the movie, Wallace is just a peaceful guy who wants to farm and raise a family.
Right.
But Heselrigge murders Wallace's secret wife, Marion Bradefeud. So Wallace's attack on Lanark is framed as a quest for deeply personal, romantic revenge.
Yes.
The political rebellion is almost an accidental byproduct of a husband's grief.
It makes for a compelling, universally relatable narrative.
Of course it does.
But what do the actual contemporary sources, the documents from the 1290s, say about Marion Bradefeud?
I'm guessing absolutely nothing.
Zero. There is no contemporary evidence she ever existed.
No.
None at all. The story does not appear in any English or Scottish record from the time. It is a literary invention crafted almost 2 centuries later by Blind Harry, perhaps drawing on heavily garbled local folklore or simply inventing a tragic backstory to make his hero more sympathetic to a 15th century audience.
So we have to strip the romantic revenge plot away entirely. The reality is that Wallace was likely already operating as an outlaw, already involved in skirmishes and resistance against the English authorities.
He was already in the fight.
Lanark was just the moment his localized resistance boiled over into open, undeniable war.
And here is where the broader context is critical. Wallace's assassination of Heselrigge was not an isolated incident. The entire country was a powder keg, and the spark in Lanark coincided with explosions elsewhere.
Right, he wasn't acting alone in a vacuum.
Hundreds of miles to the north, a young nobleman named Andrew Moray was staging his own brilliant, highly coordinated uprising.
Andrew Moray.
Yes. Moray had escaped from an English prison, returned to his family's lands in the north, and systematically began capturing English-held castles.
So here's where it gets really interesting. You have Wallace in the south, leading this grassroots middle-class insurgency.
Yeah.
You have Moray in the north, running a more organized, noble-led rebellion. But what about the elite? What of the billionaires, the earls, and the great magnates who had signed the ragman roll doing while these guys are actually fighting the occupation?
It reveals a fascinating and fundamental class divide in medieval Scottish society.
I do.
In the summer of 1297, a group of the highest-ranking Scottish nobles, including the Steward of Scotland, the Bishop of Glasgow, and a young Robert the Bruce, did actually raise an army and take to the field.
Okay, so the elite did step up eventually.
They stepped up, but they folded almost instantly.
What? Why?
They marched their army to Irvine in July 1297 to face an English force. But before a major battle could even commence, the Scottish nobles lost their nerve.
Really?
Yeah, they entered into negotiations, agreed to terms, and capitulated to the English commanders.
Wait, let me stop you there. We just established that Wallace and Moray are actively bleeding the English occupation dry.
Right.
Why do the guys with the most resources, the best armor, and the largest retinues just give up without swinging a sword?
Because of the complex mechanics of medieval land ownership. Many of these top-tier Scottish nobles were cross-border magnates.
What does that mean?
They held vast, lucrative estates in Scotland, but they also owned massive tracts of land in England, granted to their ancestors decades earlier.
Ah, so their financial portfolios are incredibly exposed.
Precisely. If they fight Edward in Scotland, he will instantly confiscate their English estates, depriving them of half their income and power.
They'd lose a fortune.
Exactly. Furthermore, these men are playing a long-term dynastic game. They have to worry about the survival of their noble houses over centuries. So, when faced with an English army, their primary instinct is self-preservation and negotiation to protect their assets.
Whereas a guy like William Wallace, who barely owns the horse he rides on, has absolutely nothing to lose.
Nothing at all.
His anchor is localized, visceral, and totally uncompromised by international property portfolios.
That dynamic is exactly why Wallace's movement drew such immense strength from the lesser gentry and the free peasantry.
They related to him.
Yes. He couldn't come to terms with the English administration, and his followers didn't want him to. They viewed the capitulation of the nobles at Irvine with disgust.
So the nobles sideline themselves, which ironically leaves the field entirely open for the underdogs.
It does.
By the late summer of 1297, these two highly successful non-aristocratic rebellions, Wallace moving up from the south, Moray moving down from the north, are about to combine forces, and they converge at a geographical choke point that is going to change European history. September 11th, 1297, the Battle of Stirling Bridge.
The English administration in Scotland has finally realized that they have a massive crisis on their hands.
They can't ignore it anymore.
Exactly. They assemble a significant army to march north and crush this peasant uprising once and for all. This army is commanded by the Earl of Surrey, a seasoned veteran, and a man named Hugh de Cressingham, the deeply unpopular English treasurer of Scotland.
Okay, I want to focus on the military mechanics here. Because on paper, this shouldn't even be called a battle.
No, it should be a massacre.
It should be a police action.
Yeah.
The English have a larger army, they're professional soldiers, they have better armor, and most importantly, they have heavy cavalry.
The tanks of the medieval world.
Right. Let's explain why that matters for a second. In 13th century warfare, heavy cavalry isn't just guys on horses. It's the ultimate kinetic weapon. It's thousands of pounds of horse, man, and steel moving at 30 miles an hour, focused on the tip of a lance. An infantry line made of lightly armed farmers physically cannot withstand that impact.
If the battle had been fought on an open, flat plain, the Scottish rebellion would have ended that day.
Totally.
The English cavalry would have trampled them into the dirt. But the brilliance of Wallace and Moray lay entirely in how they leveraged geography to equalize that massive technological and class imbalance.
They don't meet the English in the open.
No.
They position their forces on a high, rocky outcrop called the Abbey Crag, which overlooks the River Forth.
And the River Forth is a deep, tidal river that acts as a natural moat across the center of Scotland. To get to the Scottish army, the English had to cross it.
Right.
And the only crossing point available was Stirling Bridge. Now, you must banish any mental image of a wide stone structure.
Not a modern bridge.
Not at all. In 1297, this was a narrow, rickety timber bridge. It was so narrow that contemporary accounts suggest only 2 or 3 horsemen could ride across it side by side.
So it's a massive bottleneck.
Worse than that, the ground on the northern side of the river, the side the Scots were waiting on, was a loop of the river known as a haugh. It was boggy, marshy, waterlogged ground.
Which is the absolute worst possible terrain for heavy cavalry.
Terrible.
You can't get up to charging speed in a swamp. The horses will sink up to their knees.
Exactly.
It's madness that the English commanders even attempted this. It is literally like trying to push an entire professional football team through a single revolving door, one by one, while the opposing team is just waiting on the other side with baseball bats.
That is a perfect analogy.
Why would veteran military commanders walk into such an obvious suicidal trap?
It was a lethal combination of arrogance, impatience, and administrative friction.
Right.
We know from the chronicles that a local Scottish knight actually approached the English commanders and pointed out a ford a few miles upstream where the cavalry could have crossed safely, 60 abreast, and outflanked Wallace entirely.
So they had the tactical intelligence, they knew about a better way?
They had it, but they ignored it. Hugh de Cressingham, the treasurer, was obsessed with costs.
Of course. The accountant.
Exactly. He argued that marching to the ford would delay the battle and cost the English treasury more money and wages. Furthermore, the English aristocrats possessed a profound, fatal disdain for their enemy.
They just didn't respect them.
They did not believe a rabble of Scottish spearmen would dare attack a royal English vanguard.
So, on the morning of September 11th, the English begin feeding their troops into the meat grinder.
Slowly but surely.
They start slowly walking across this narrow wooden bridge. And Wallace and Moray show incredible, terrifying discipline. They don't attack the first 10 guys. They just sit on the high ground and watch.
The psychological control required for that is immense. The Scottish leaders waited until a substantial portion of the English vanguard had crossed perhaps a few thousand infantry and a significant contingent of their heavy cavalry.
Okay.
They waited until just enough English soldiers were on the northern bank that the Scottish army could still overwhelm them, but too many to quickly retreat back across the bottleneck.
And once that critical mass is reached, they spring the trap.
The Scottish spearmen charge down from the Abbey Craig. They don't attack the front of the English lines. They drive a wedge straight toward the bridge itself, cutting off the vanguard from the rest of the army on the southern bank.
It is a brilliant, savage maneuver. The English soldiers who had crossed are suddenly trapped.
Completely isolated.
They have a wall of Scottish spears charging at them from the front and a deep, drowning river at their backs. The heavy cavalry tries to maneuver, but as we discussed, the ground is a marsh.
It's all mud.
The horses flounder, they panic, they throw their riders into the mud.
The battle rapidly devolves into a slaughter. The heavy armor that was supposed to protect the English knights became a death sentence as they were pushed back into the river Forth and drowned.
Wow.
The bridge itself became choked with dead bodies and panicked men trying to flee. Some chronicles suggest the bridge actually collapsed under the weight. Others imply the Scots intentionally destroyed it.
Either way, it's a disaster.
Regardless, the English army was severed in half and the vanguard was annihilated while the Earl of Surrey watched helplessly from the opposite bank.
And this brings us to one of the most macabre, visceral details of this entire deep dive. Hugh de Cressingham, the treasurer who had been so eager to save money that morning, is killed in the mud.
He is.
And the Scottish soldiers hate this man with a passion that is hard to articulate. He was the literal face of English taxation and extortion. What did they do to his body?
The chronicles record that they flayed him. They stripped the skin from his corpse.
It's horrifying, but it's not just mindless savagery, is it? There's a dark, symbolic irony to it.
Absolutely. According to the Lanercost Chronicle, they divided his skin among the troops as gruesome souvenirs, and it was said they used strips of it to make sword belts and girths for their horses.
Wow.
Cressingham had spent his tenure in Scotland squeezing every ounce of wealth from the populace. In death, they literally stripped him of everything he had left. It speaks volumes about the depth of psychological bitterness the occupation had provoked.
The Battle of Stirling Bridge is an earthquake. It shatters the myth of English military invincibility. It proves that an army of commoners, using terrain and discipline, can slaughter the aristocratic elite.
It changed everything.
Overnight, William Wallace goes from being a localized nuisance to a national hero of the First Order. But this incredible victory comes with a hidden, tragic cost that is going to fundamentally destabilize the rebellion.
Andrew Moray, the brilliant northern commander who co-led the army, suffers severe wounds in the melee at Stirling Bridge.
Right.
He lingers for a couple of months, but eventually dies from his injuries.
And I want to dig into the political vacuum that creates. Because Moray wasn't just a good tactician. He provided something Wallace desperately needed.
Moray provided social legitimacy. Because he was of noble birth, his presence at the head of the army made the rebellion palatable to the established magnates. It maintained the traditional feudal hierarchy.
But with Moray dead, Wallace is left completely isolated at the top. You suddenly have a man of incredibly humble origins who holds total military control over the entire country.
Which is an unprecedented, almost unthinkable situation in a rigid medieval society.
Unheard of.
But his success is so undeniable that the Scottish political class has no choice but to recognize reality. Wallace is knighted, we don't know exactly by whom, perhaps by a prominent earl, and by March 1298, the documents refer to him with a stunning new title.
Guardian of the Kingdom of Scotland.
Yes.
He is effectively the ruler of the nation, governing in the name of the exiled King John Balliol. And he immediately utilizes that power to launch a massive, punitive counteroffensive.
He doesn't wait around.
No, he doesn't just sit in Scotland waiting for the English to return. He takes the army south, across the border, and launches deeply destructive winter raids into northern English counties like Cumberland and Northumberland.
He spends weeks ravaging the countryside, burning towns, destroying crops, and driving off livestock.
And here's where I have to play devil's advocate for a minute, because the mythology loves to paint Wallace as this pure, unblemished hero fighting for freedom. But if his army is sweeping through northern England, putting civilian farmers to the sword and burning churches, doesn't that severely dent the whole noble liberator narrative?
It absolutely challenges the sanitized, modern version of the story. But to understand it, we must evaluate his actions through the mechanics of medieval warfare, not 21st century morality.
Okay, fair enough.
In the late 13th century, there were no standing armies with centralized payrolls. You could not issue your soldiers a weekly paycheck.
So how do you keep thousands of armed men from just going home for the winter harvest?
You pay them in plunder. This tactic was known as a chevauchée.
Chevauchée.
Yes. Raiding enemy territory to strip it of wealth, food, and resources was standard accepted strategic practice. It served three distinct purposes.
Which were?
It paid your troops, it terrorized the enemy populace, and it denied the enemy king the agricultural resources he would need to mount a counter-invasion in the spring.
Okay, so it's brutal, it results in immense civilian suffering, and we shouldn't romanticize it. But Wallace is operating as a man of his time, fighting a total war for survival.
Exactly.
The problem is you don't burn down northern England without drawing the direct, furious attention of the most capable military commander in Europe.
King Edward I. He had been away fighting in Flanders during the disaster at Stirling Bridge.
Right.
When he receives word of the uprising and the raids, he brokers a hasty truce with the French, returns to England, and is utterly enraged.
He moves the English government to York. He summons the largest army the crown has fielded in generations. We're talking over 2,000 heavy cavalry and tens of thousands of infantry.
A massive force.
And in the summer of 1298, Edward personally leads this monstrous force north into Scotland.
Wallace is a realist. He knows perfectly well that his infantry cannot face Edward's massive veteran army in an open, pitched battle.
Not a chance.
So he employs a scorched earth strategy. As the English army advances into Scotland, Wallace retreats ahead of them, burning the crops, destroying the mills, and poisoning the wells.
He's using starvation as a weapon, and it almost works.
It was incredibly close to succeeding. Edward's supply lines via the sea were disrupted by bad weather. His army was starving, disease was spreading, and a violent mutiny actually broke out between his Welsh infantry and English cavalry.
Really? A mutiny?
Yes. Edward was on the verge of ordering a humiliating retreat back to Edinburgh.
But the fog of war clears at the worst possible moment. Edward receives intelligence from two Scottish nobles who had switched sides, revealing that Wallace's army is camped just a few miles away in the woods near Falkirk.
Yep.
They were planning a surprise night attack on the retreating English.
When Edward hears this, he reportedly says, "As God lives, they shall not need to follow me, for I will go to meet them."
Wow.
He immediately orders his exhausted, starving army to force march through the night to catch Wallace before he can slip away.
The Battle of Falkirk, July 22nd, 1298. Wallace is cornered. He has to fight.
He has no choice.
But he doesn't have a narrow bridge or a deep river to hide behind this time. He is facing the full terrifying might of the English heavy cavalry on relatively solid ground.
Right.
So he deploys a famous tactical innovation to protect his infantry, the schiltron. Break down the physical mechanics of this formation for us.
A schiltron was essentially a massive, densely packed formation of spearmen. Imagine a forest of timber. Thousands of men grouped tightly together in a circle or an oval.
Okay, picture that.
They are holding spears that are 12 to 14 feet long. The men in the front rank kneel, bracing the butts of their spears firmly against the ground and their feet.
Got it.
The ranks behind them point their spears over the shoulders of the men in front.
It's a deadly medieval porcupine. It's a solid wall of steel points facing outward in every direction. And this requires incredible drill and training.
Yes, it does.
You can't just hand 1,000 farmers heavy poles and expect them not to flinch when a horse charges at them.
Exactly. The psychological fortitude required to stand in a schiltron is immense, but mathematically and physically, it works.
How so?
When the English cavalry charged at Falkirk, they hit the schiltrons and bounced off. Horses are incredibly intelligent animals. They will not willingly impale themselves on a solid wall of wooden spikes.
That makes total sense.
The cavalry rode around the formations looking for gaps, but the Scottish lines held firm.
If the battle had simply been heavy cavalry against disciplined spearmen, Wallace might have pulled off another miracle.
He might have.
But Edward I is not the Earl of Surrey. He's a veteran of decades of war. He realizes the cavalry isn't working, so he pulls them back.
Right.
And he introduces a technological shift that fundamentally alters the trajectory of the battle and really the future of European warfare.
Edward brings forward his masked longbowmen. He had thousands of archers, many from Wales, armed with bows capable of driving a heavy arrow through chainmail at a considerable distance.
And here's the fatal flaw of the schiltron.
The one big weakness.
The very thing that made it invincible against cavalry. The fact that thousands of men were packed shoulder to shoulder, completely static, turns them into the ultimate sitting ducks for archery.
The Scottish spearmen couldn't move. If they dispersed to avoid the arrows, the cavalry would immediately ride them down.
They're trapped.
So they just had to stand there. The English archers stepped up and poured sustained, devastating, high-trajectory missile fire into the dense Scottish ranks.
It's a horrifying scenario. It's an industrialized slaughter. The arrows tear huge, bloody gaps in the schiltrons.
Men are dropping everywhere.
And the tight formations begin to physically disintegrate under the relentless pressure.
And once Edward saw the schiltrons lose their cohesion and the spears begin to waver, he unleashed his heavy cavalry a second time.
Oh, no.
They charged right into those broken gaps. Once the cavalry got inside the defensive circle, the slaughter was absolute. The Scottish army was utterly dismantled.
It is a catastrophic defeat. Thousands of Scots are killed. Wallace manages to survive and escapes the battlefield into the nearby woods. But his military reputation, that aura of invincibility he built at Stirling Bridge, is completely shattered.
And in medieval politics, power is intrinsically tied to military success. Without it, Wallace's unprecedented position as a commoner ruling a nation simply evaporates.
It's gone.
Within a few short months, he resigns as Guardian of Scotland. The established high-status noblesmen like Robert the Bruce and John Comyn immediately step back in to fill the void, taking over as joint guardians.
For 99% of historical figures, this would be the end of the biography.
Usually, yes.
You rose high, you lost the big battle, you fade into obscurity, or you get quietly assassinated by your rivals. But William Wallace does something genuinely extraordinary here.
He really does.
He realizes he can no longer command armies in the field, so he shifts his strategy entirely. He takes the fight to a completely different arena. He vanishes from Scotland, and a few years later, in 1300, he suddenly reappears in France.
This is one of the most fascinating and overlooked chapters of his life. We have concrete documentary evidence of this journey.
Really? Like what?
A letter of safe conduct issued by King Philip IV of France, commanding his officials to assist William Wallace of Scotland, knight, on his travels to the papal court.
Let's pause and appreciate the logistics of this for a second. How does a defeated Scottish outlaw, a guy from the minor gentry, manage to travel across Europe, secure an audience with the King of France, and then potentially travel onward to Rome to lobby the Pope?
It's incredible.
Who's funding this? How is he communicating?
It entirely shatters the pop culture image of Wallace as a brawny, unlettered barbarian swinging a massive sword.
Totally.
It proves that Wallace was an educated, highly sophisticated operator. He was likely traveling with a retinue of Scottish clerics who handled the translation and logistics, utilizing the network of the medieval church.
Right.
He was in Europe attempting to leverage the Old Alliance, desperately begging the French king and the Pope to apply diplomatic pressure on Edward I to withdraw from Scotland and release King John Balliol.
He's trying to win a guerrilla war via geopolitical diplomacy.
Exactly.
But while Wallace is playing international chess in Paris and Rome, the situation back home in Scotland is rapidly deteriorating.
Edward is relentless. Year after year, he mounts massive, expensive campaigns into Scotland, slowly grinding down the castles and the resistance.
Wearing them down.
By the winter of 1303 into 1304, the Scottish political elite are exhausted. Their lands have been ravaged repeatedly. The French king has abandoned them to make a separate peace with England.
The writing is on the wall. And in early 1304, the very men who replaced Wallace the Guardians, including John Comyn and eventually Robert the Bruce, systematically capitulate.
They give up.
They arrange a massive peace settlement with King Edward. And Edward, being a pragmatic statesman when it suits him, offers them surprisingly generous terms.
Edward realized that a pacified Scotland was cheaper than a conquered one. He allowed the Scottish nobles to keep their titles, retain their lands, and even integrate into his administration.
Okay, so a pretty good deal for them.
They simply had to bend the knee and accept his absolute overlordship. Virtually the entire Scottish political establishment submits.
Everyone submits. Except Wallace.
Just Wallace.
Wallace returns to Scotland and refuses the terms. He goes back to being a hunted outlaw, hiding in the woods, launching minor ambushes. And I have to ask the obvious question here. Why was he the only one who wouldn't stop?
It's a great question.
Was it pure, uncompromising ideological principle? Or did he just look at the political board and realize, look, I embarrassed the most powerful king in Europe at Stirling Bridge. My men turned his royal treasurer into a leather belt. Edward is never, ever going to forgive me. There's no generous peace deal waiting for me.
It is almost certainly a combination of both. Edward had specifically excluded Wallace from the general amnesty.
Oh, okay.
He ordered the Scottish nobles who had just surrendered to actively hunt Wallace down as a condition of their own pardons.
That's brutal.
But we also cannot discount the profound psychological difference in Wallace. He had built his entire identity, his entire meteoric rise, on absolute resistance to English authority.
Right.
He possessed an uncompromising, singular vision that the nobles, with their estates and dynastic compromises, simply did not share.
But that absolute refusal to bend the knee, the very thing that secures his eternal legacy, is also what seals his immediate doom.
It is.
Because suddenly, William Wallace isn't just an enemy of England. He is a massive political liability to his own countrymen. The Scottish nobles have finally bought a fragile, desperately needed peace, and this outlaw is running around the forests, threatening to bring Edward's wrath down on them all over again.
Which leads directly to the tragedy of August 3rd, 1305.
Yeah.
Wallace manages to evade capture for over a year, but the net is constantly tightening. He is finally captured near Glasgow. And the cruelest twist of the knife is that he is not captured by an English patrol.
No.
He's betrayed by a fellow Scot.
A knight named John de Menteith.
Yes. Menteith was a Scottish noble who had submitted to Edward and was acting as the English-appointed sheriff of Dunbarton. Acting on an informant's tip, Menteith's men apprehended Wallace in his sleep.
It is the ultimate sting. You survive the might of the greatest military machine in Europe, only to be sold out by your own side for maintaining the very principles they abandoned.
It's devastating.
And King Edward wastes absolutely no time. He has Wallace heavily chained and fast-tracked to London under heavy guard. On August 23rd, 1305, Wallace is brought into Westminster Hall.
And what follows is ostensibly a legal trial, but in reality, it is a meticulously choreographed piece of state theater designed to humiliate and destroy him.
They place him on a bench at the south end of Westminster Hall, and they crown him with a garland of laurel leaves. Are the leaves?
It was a mockery. A rumor had circulated that Wallace once claimed he would wear a crown in Westminster Hall.
Oh, wow.
Edward's officials were turning that alleged prophecy into a cruel joke. They then read out the formal charges against him: murder, the destruction of towns, the burning of churches, and above all, treason against the King of England.
But Wallace doesn't just sit there and cower. He speaks up.
He does.
And he offers a defense that is brilliant in its strict legal logic. He stands in Westminster Hall and shouts, "I cannot be a traitor to King Edward because I never swore an oath of loyalty to him."
In the context of medieval jurisprudence, it is a highly sophisticated, unanswerable argument.
It really is.
The legal definition of treason was the betrayal of a sworn personal bond of fealty. Wallace was pointing out a stark fact. While every other Scottish noble had signed the Ragman Roll and sworn an oath to Edward, Wallace never had.
Right.
His allegiance had always remained with John Balliol. You cannot legally betray a lord who was never your lord.
It's the ultimate mic drop. But of course, this is a show trial. Edward's judges do not care about the nuance of Scottish legal theory. They have a script, and the verdict is predetermined. They find him guilty on all counts. And the sentence they pass down is the absolute maximum penalty available under medieval law to be hanged, drawn, and quartered.
The specifics of this execution are vital to understanding Edward's mindset. It wasn't just a punishment, it was an anatomical deconstruction of a symbol.
That's a grim way to put it.
The execution was carried out the very same day at Smithfield. Wallace was tied to a hurdle at the tail of a horse and dragged for miles through the dirt and filth of the London streets, enduring the abuse of the crowds.
And when they reach the gallows, the physical horror really begins.
He is hanged by the neck, but deliberately cut down while he was still conscious and gasping for air.
Horrible.
He was then strapped to a table, castrated, and his abdomen was sliced open. His entrails and bowels were pulled out and burned in a brazier right in front of his eyes.
My God.
Finally, his suffering was ended when he was beheaded. His corpse was then systematically butchered into 4 quarters.
It is hard for a modern mind to even process that level of calculated cruelty.
It is.
But Edward didn't stop there. He didn't just throw the remains in an unmarked grave. He utilized Wallace's body as a visceral, geographical billboard.
The head was dipped in pitch and impaled on a spike above London Bridge, the traditional resting place for traitors.
Right.
But the 4 quarters of his body were sent on a grim tour of the north. They were displayed on the gates of Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth.
Edward is physically distributing pieces of Wallace across the country to send an unmistakable, gruesome message. Look upon this flesh. This is what happens when you resist the machinery of the English Empire.
That was exactly his intent.
He truly believed that by dismembering the man, he was putting the final bloody punctuation mark on the Scottish rebellion.
But the billboard completely backfired.
Totally.
Edward misread the mood of the Scottish populace entirely. Instead of acting as a terrifying deterrent, Wallace's horrific death acted as a catalyst. Edward inadvertently handed the Scots the one thing more powerful than a living hero, an unblemished martyr.
Because the timeline here is staggering. Wallace is executed in August 1305. Less than 6 months later, the Scottish rebellion explodes again, led by the very nobles who had previously surrendered.
Yes.
In February 1306, Robert the Bruce arranges a meeting with his primary political rival, John Comyn, inside a church in Dumfries. And Bruce brutally murders Comyn right there on the altar steps.
It was a desperate, bloody gamble. Knowing he would be excommunicated for murder in a holy place, Bruce had no choice but to push all his chips to the center of the table.
He went all in.
A few weeks later, he rode to Scone and crowned himself King of Scots, reigniting the war for independence.
And Bruce, unlike Wallace, actually manages to win the long game. Takes decades. But he defeats the English army, now led by Edward's much less capable son, Edward II, at the massive Battle of Bannockburn in 1314.
A huge victory.
He secures diplomatic recognition through the famous Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, a letter sent to the Pope, asserting Scotland's ancient right to freedom. And finally, in 1328, the English crown formally signs the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, legally recognizing Scotland as an independent nation.
Which is an incredible achievement.
So what does this all mean? This is the central paradox of this entire deep dive. If Robert the Bruce is the man who endured the long war, if he is the king who won the spectacular victory at Bannockburn, and if he is the diplomat who finally secured the Treaty of Independence,
right,
why is William Wallace the name that echoes so loudly through history? Why did Hollywood make a $100 million movie about the outlaw who lost at Falkirk instead of the king who won the entire war?
It comes down to the necessity of purity and national myth-making.
Tell me more about that.
Robert the Bruce was an incredibly effective king and military leader, but his path to victory was inherently messy. It was compromised by the realities of survival.
Like what we talked about earlier.
Yes. He changed sides multiple times between the English and the Scots to protect his lands. He repeatedly swore oaths to King Edward and then broke them. And his reign began with the sacrilegious murder of his own countrymen. His story is one of brilliant cynical, dynastic, real politics.
It's Game of Thrones. It's effective, but it's hard to put on a motivational poster.
Exactly. Whereas William Wallace's narrative is one of pure, uncomplicated martyrdom.
Right.
From the moment he enters the historical record at Lanark to the moment he is butchered at Smithfield, his stance never wavers. He fought, he refused every opportunity to bend the knee, and he suffered a horrifying death because of it.
He never compromised.
There is zero moral gray area in his defiance. And for a nation trying to forge a unified identity out of decades of trauma, that absolute purity makes him the perfect vessel for legend.
And that legend was locked into place by Blind Harry's poem in the 1470s and then turbocharged for a global audience by Braveheart in 1995.
Yes.
And just before we wrap up, we should briefly dunk on the historical absurdities of that film. Aside from the fact that Scottish warriors in the 13th century did not wear kilts, which were invented centuries later, or paint their faces blue like ancient Picts, the film's central romantic subplot is completely impossible.
Oh, it's totally fabricated. The film depicts Wallace having a passionate affair with Isabella of France, the wife of Edward II, implying Wallace might be the father of the next English king.
Right, which is just crazy.
In historical reality, when William Wallace was executed in 1305, Princess Isabella was a small child, perhaps 9 years old, living in France. She didn't arrive in England until years later.
It's wildly fabricated. But the fact that the movie resonated so powerfully across the globe just proves our initial point. The enduring emotional power of the Wallace narrative will always overshadow the dry administrative facts.
It will.
Over the last hour, we've peeled back the layers of that myth. We've seen how an obscure son of a minor landowner, a man from the feudal middle class, rose up in a matter of months to exploit geography and break the English army at Stirling Bridge.
We saw him govern a kingdom, navigate the treacherous geopolitical courts of Europe as a diplomat, and face a barbaric execution simply because his legal and moral code refused to accommodate subjugation.
It is a staggering trajectory. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. A historical hypothetical to mull over the next time you think about this era.
Let's hear it.
What if John de Menteith had never betrayed him? What if William Wallace had managed to evade capture in 1305 and had lived in the shadows long enough to see Robert the Bruce murder Comyn and crown himself King of Scots?
It is a fascinating counterfactual. Given Wallace's absolute loyalty to the exiled King John Balliol and his uncompromising nature, how would he have reacted to a usurper like Bruce taking the throne?
That's the question. Would the ultimate Scottish hero have eventually become a massive political liability or even an enemy to the very king who won Scottish independence? History loves a martyr because martyrs never have to compromise in peacetime. Is it possible that for the legend of William Wallace to truly unite Scotland, the man himself actually had to die?
Wow.
It makes you look at that murky historical camera lens completely differently. Sometimes the myth is exactly what a nation needs to survive. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the muddy, bloody waters of 13th century Scotland. It just goes to show that real history, with all its chaotic logistics, its brutal politics, and its uncompromising realities, is always stranger and infinitely more fascinating than the movies.